I never thought I would hear those words from my own mother. "Get out! You're no daughter of mine." Marlene's voice, usually so composed, now cracked with fury. Her face, a mask of rage, was inches from mine as she wielded a kitchen knife, its tip menacingly pointing at me. Standing there in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, I felt a mix of shock and disbelief. I had come to help, to support our family, but now I was being branded a leech, a burden. "Marlene, please put the knife down," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You know I've been paying more than half of my salary to help with the expenses. That's $3,000 every month." But my words seemed to bounce off her, unheard. She continued her tirade, accusing me of freeloading and being ungrateful. I retreated a step, maintaining a cautious distance. The woman before me was not the mother I remembered from my childhood. She had transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone driven by anger and resentment. As she continued to rant, I couldn't help but think of my father, David. He was the reason I pursued a career in software development. My mind drifted to the times we spent together when I was a child. His face would light up whenever he talked about computers. "Look at this one, Elaine. It's amazing how technology evolves," he would say, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Those moments in the electronics stores, with him explaining the intricacies of the latest models, sparked my passion for technology. My career was a tribute to those memories, to the bond we shared. I had worked hard, earning a respectable position at a reputable tech company. My job allowed me to work remotely, which was why I moved back home when David's health took a turn for the worse. But now, faced with Marlene's unwarranted hostility, I wondered if I had made a mistake. The sound of Marlene slamming her hand on the countertop jolted me back to the present. "If I knew you'd become such a parasite, I would never have had you," she spat out. Her words stung, but I refused to let them break me. "I'm here for Dad, Marlene, not to argue with you," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. The situation was escalating beyond what I could have imagined. It was then that I heard the faint sound of a car pulling up in the driveway. David was home from his latest doctor's appointment. I rushed to open the front door, welcoming him and steering him away from the kitchen and Marlene's wrath. As I helped him settle down in the living room, I couldn't shake off the heaviness in my heart. The confrontation with Marlene had opened a chasm in our family, one that I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. I looked at my father, his face weary but smiling at me. In that moment, I knew I had to stay strong for him, regardless of the storm that was brewing in our once peaceful home. The hospital's sterile white walls felt cold and unwelcoming as I paced back and forth, waiting for news about David's condition. The call from Marlene had been abrupt and alarming. "David's collapsed. We're at the hospital." When the doctor finally emerged, his face was somber. "Your father had a stroke. We've managed to stabilize him, but he's not out of the woods yet." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Can I see him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "In a moment," the doctor replied, "but be prepared. He may have lasting effects from the stroke." As I entered the dimly lit room, I saw David lying there, frail and hooked to machines. His once strong and capable hands lay motionless by his side. I took his hand, tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm here, Dad. You're going to be okay." His eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile. "Elaine, my girl," he murmured. I spent hours by his bedside, talking to him, reminiscing about our days exploring technology together. Every so often, Marlene would come in, her visits brief and her words few. "How is he?" she would ask, her tone devoid of warmth. "He's fighting, Marlene. He needs us now more than ever," I would reply, hoping for some sign of compassion from her. But compassion was a language Marlene seemed to have forgotten. Instead, she was more concerned about the practicalities. What about his job? The bills? "What are we going to do for money?" she fretted. Her words stung. Was money all she could think about at a time like this? I bit back my frustration, focusing instead on David's needs. As days turned into weeks, it became clear that David's recovery would be a long road. The stroke had left him with limited mobility, and he struggled with simple tasks. The once vibrant man who taught me about the wonders of technology was now dependent on others for his most basic needs. During his hospitalization, I noticed Marlene's visits becoming even more infrequent and perfunctory. She seemed detached, more concerned with her own life than with David's well-being. I decided to confront her one evening. "Marlene, Dad needs us. He needs your support," I said, my voice tinged with desperation. Marlene scoffed. "I have my own life, Elaine. I can't be expected to drop everything. Besides, he's your father. It's your duty to take care of him." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let them deter me. "He's your husband, Marlene. He needs both of us." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. Marlene was wrapped up in her own world, a world where her needs came first and everyone else's were secondary. As I left the hospital that evening, my resolve hardened. I would be there for David no matter what. Marlene's indifference only fueled my determination to ensure my father received the love and care he deserved. The days following David's return home were a whirlwind of adjustments and challenges. I had rearranged my life to accommodate my father's needs, balancing my demanding job with caregiving and household chores. One evening, as I prepared dinner after a long day of work, Marlene strolled into the kitchen. "Make sure dinner is ready by 7, Elaine, and I want something nutritious, none of that bland stuff you've been making." Her words were like a slap in the face. Here I was, doing my best to manage everything, and all she could do was criticize. "I'm doing the best I can, Marlene. I'm not just taking care of Dad, but the entire house," I snapped back, my patience wearing thin. Marlene let out a derisive laugh. "You call this taking care? You're barely managing. I had to handle much more at your age, without complaining." I bit my tongue to keep from lashing out. Arguing with Marlene was futile. She had always been self-absorbed, but now her lack of empathy and appreciation was more glaring than ever. Later that night, I helped David with his exercises, a routine that had become our little ritual. "You're doing great, Dad," I encouraged him as he struggled to move his arm. He smiled weakly. "I'm sorry, Elaine. I never wanted to be a burden to you." "You're not a burden, Dad. You're my father, and I love taking care of you," I reassured him, though the weight of my responsibilities was beginning to take its toll. The following morning, I found Marlene lounging in the living room, a magazine in hand. "Elaine, when you finish with your work, could you clean up around here? It's getting rather dusty," she said, not even bothering to look up. I clenched my fists, frustration boiling inside me. Here I was, juggling work and caregiving, and Marlene couldn't even lift a finger to help. It was always about her comfort, her needs. That evening, as I lay in bed, exhausted and overwhelmed, I made a decision. I couldn't continue like this. Something had to change. The realization that I was alone in this battle weighed heavily on me, but I knew I had to be strong, for David's sake. Marlene's selfishness had reached a point where it was not just infuriating, but deeply hurtful. Her indifference to our struggles was a clear sign that she was no longer the mother I once knew. The bond that should have united us in caring for David had been shattered by her callousness. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew thicker. Marlene's demands became more frequent and unreasonable, while her contributions remained non-existent. The strain was becoming unbearable, and I knew I had to find a way out of this toxic environment, for both my father's and my own sanity. The discovery was accidental, yet it shattered any remaining illusions I had about Marlene. I was searching for an old photo album in my closet when I noticed the empty space where my collection of designer bags and accessories used to be. Confusion turned to horror as I realized they were all gone. Confronting Marlene was inevitable. "Did you go into my room and take my things?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Marlene, lounging on the sofa with a glass of wine, didn't even bother to look up. "Your room? This is my house, Elaine. I don't need your permission to enter any room." Her nonchalant dismissal of my privacy was infuriating, but what she said next was even worse. "You had some pretty good stuff there. Sold them off for a nice sum. You should be thanking me for making good use of them." I was speechless. The audacity of her actions was beyond belief. "You sold my belongings? Those were mine, Marlene. You had no right." Marlene scoffed, finally turning to face me. "Right? I'm your mother. I have every right. Besides, it's only fair since you're living here rent-free." Her twisted logic made my blood boil. Living here to take care of Dad is not living rent-free, and what you did is theft, Marlene, plain and simple. But Marlene was unmoved. "Theft? Don't be dramatic, Elaine. I'm just taking what's owed to me. After all, I've been putting up with you and your father." That was the last straw. The woman in front of me was not the mother I grew up with. She was a stranger, consumed by selfishness and greed. Over the next few days, I struggled to come to terms with Marlene's betrayal. My sense of violation was profound. But more than that, it was the realization that she saw us not as family, but as assets to exploit. I began to plan our escape. David, despite his weakened state, was supportive. "We can't stay here, Elaine, not with her," he said one evening, his voice filled with sadness and resolve. The plan was simple, yet daunting. We would leave while Marlene was out, taking only what we needed. I found a small but comfortable apartment close to the hospital and arranged everything in secret. The day of our departure was tense. As the movers quietly packed our belongings, I watched the clock, praying that Marlene wouldn't return early. David sat in his wheelchair, a mix of apprehension and relief on his face. As we drove away from the house, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. This was the home where I had grown up, where I had so many memories with my father. But it was also the place where I had lost my mother. Not to death, but to something far worse: greed and indifference. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller and smaller, and with it, Marlene's hold on our lives. We were finally free, but the cost of that freedom was more than I had ever imagined. Our new apartment was modest, but filled with a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. As I unpacked our belongings, David watched, a look of contentment on his face. "It's good to be away from that house, Elaine. I haven't felt this relaxed in years." I smiled at him, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "Me too, Dad. We'll make new memories here, just the two of us." But our tranquility was short-lived. A few days after our move, I received a call from Marlene. Her voice was icy, laced with anger and disbelief. "Where are you? Why have you taken David? You can't just leave like that." I held the phone away from my ear, her shrill voice echoing in the quiet room. "You told me to leave, Marlene. So I did. Dad and I are safe and happy now." There was a pause on the other end. "You think you can just walk away, after everything I've done for you?" I clenched my jaw, fighting back the urge to yell. "Everything you've done? You mean selling my belongings, neglecting Dad?" Her response was a venomous laugh. "Oh, please, you're just like your father, weak and pathetic. You'll come crawling back, you need me." But I was done being her victim. "No, Marlene, we don't need you, we never did." Hanging up, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Marlene had chosen her path, and now we were choosing ours. The following weeks were a time of healing and adjustment. David's health was slowly improving, and we settled into a comfortable routine. I found joy in the small things: cooking meals for us, watching movies together, and talking about everything and nothing. But our peace was once again shattered when I discovered Marlene had been spreading lies about us to our relatives and friends. She painted herself as the victim, abandoned by her ungrateful daughter and sick husband. I was furious. How dare she twist the truth to gain sympathy? It was time for Marlene to face the consequences of her actions. I contacted a lawyer, detailing the years of emotional and financial abuse we had endured. "We want to take legal action," I told him. "Marlene needs to be held accountable." The lawyer was sympathetic, but warned me that it would be a challenging case. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? It will be hard, especially on your father." I looked at David, who nodded resolutely. "We're sure. It's not just about us, it's about setting things right." As the legal battle began, I felt a sense of purpose. This was more than just revenge. It was about standing up to a bully, about reclaiming our dignity. Marlene fought back fiercely, her true nature revealing itself in court. Her lies and manipulations were laid bare for all to see. The process was grueling, but with each passing day I felt stronger, more empowered. Finally, the verdict was in our favor. Marlene was ordered to pay restitution for the items she had sold and for the emotional distress she had caused. Leaving the courthouse, David squeezed my hand. "You did it, Elaine. You stood up to her." I smiled, tears of relief and triumph in my eyes. "We did it, Dad. Together." The legal victory over Marlene was more than just a win in court. It was a reclaiming of our lives and dignity. Yet, as we settled into our new normal, I couldn't shake off a lingering sense of unease. One afternoon, a few weeks after the trial, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart sink. It was from a cousin, informing me that Marlene had been spreading vicious rumors about me in the family, painting me as an ungrateful daughter who had manipulated her poor, sick father to steal his money and abandon her. Fury and disbelief churned inside me. How could she continue her deceitful ways even after everything that had happened? I realized then that Marlene would never change. She was a toxin that needed to be completely removed from our lives. I decided to confront her. Arriving at what used to be our family home, I was greeted by the sight of Marlene, who looked surprised and slightly apprehensive. "Elaine, what are you doing here?" she asked, a false note of concern in her voice. "I'm here to put an end to your lies, Marlene. You've lost in court, and yet you continue to spread falsehoods about me and Dad. Why can't you just leave us in peace?" Marlene's expression hardened. "Peace? You've taken everything from Elaine, my husband, my home, my reputation. You think I'll just sit back and accept that?" "I haven't taken anything that wasn't already destroyed by your own actions," I shot back. "You've pushed everyone away with your selfishness and greed." Marlene stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You think you've won, don't you? But I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you. I'll ruin you, just like you've ruined me." I stood my ground, my resolve unwavering. "No, Marlene, you're the one who's ruined, and I won't let you drag us down any longer." Turning on my heel, I left her standing on the doorstep, her angry shouts fading behind me. I knew that our battle was far from over, but I was ready to fight for our newfound freedom and peace. In the following days, I worked with our lawyer to file a restraining order against Marlene. It was a drastic step, but necessary to protect ourselves from her relentless harassment and defamation. The day the restraining order was granted felt like a second victory. Marlene was legally bound to stay away from us, to cease her poisonous campaign against us. It was a relief, but also a sad confirmation that the woman who had once been my mother was now nothing more than a bitter stranger. David and I could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that Marlene's ability to harm us was significantly curtailed. We focused on rebuilding our lives, on healing from the years of emotional turmoil. As I watched David one evening, laughing at a comedy show on TV, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had weathered the storm together, and though the scars remained, we were stronger for it. Marlene's reign of terror was over, and we were free to live our lives without her shadow looming over us. Months had passed since the restraining order against Marlene was put in place, and life had gradually settled into a new rhythm. The apartment felt like a true home, filled with laughter and memories in the making. David's health was stable, and though the past still cast a shadow, we were moving forward. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, the phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" "Catherine, it's me," came Marlene's voice, unmistakable and unwelcome. My heart sank. "Marlene, you know you shouldn't be calling. There's a restraining order." I know, but listen to me," she pleaded. "I need your help. I'm in trouble." Her words were laced with desperation, a stark contrast to her usual haughty tone. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, despite myself. "I'm broke, Elaine. I've lost everything. I need money. You owe me that much." I felt a mix of anger and pity. Marlene, once so proud and manipulative, was now reduced to begging. "I don't owe you anything, Marlene. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." There was a pause, and then her voice came through again, softer this time. "Please, Elaine, I'm your mother. Don't you have any compassion?" The word compassion coming from her was almost laughable. "Compassion? After everything you've done? You've never shown any compassion to Dad or me. You only care about yourself." "Elaine, please," she started, but I cut her off. "No, Marlene. It's over. You need to take responsibility for your actions. Goodbye." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. The finality of that call was both liberating and heartbreaking. Marlene had chosen her path, and it had led her to this. I turned back to the stove, the sizzle of the cooking food grounding me. David wheeled himself into the kitchen, a concerned look on his face. "Was that Marlene?" I nodded. "Yes, but it's handled. She won't bother us again." David reached out, placing a hand on mine. "You're a strong woman, Elaine. I'm proud of you." I squeezed his hand, smiling. I had a good teacher. In the days that followed, I reflected on our journey. We had faced betrayal and heartache, but we had also found strength and resilience. Marlene's absence in our lives was a void, but it was a void filled with peace. As I watched the sunset from our balcony, with David beside me, I felt a sense of closure. Our story had been one of struggle, but also of triumph. We had overcome the darkness, and now the future was ours to shape. Here's to new beginnings. Dad, I said, raising a glass of lemonade. To new beginnings, he echoed, clinking his glass against mine. And in that moment I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together as a family.